Hello. Thank you so much for coming to Flyleaf Books and supporting your local independent bookstore. Tonight, we're all gathered to hear Liza Roberts talk about her book, Art of the States. Liza Roberts is a journalist and founder of Walter Magazine. She lives in Raleigh, North Carolina. Tonight, she's joined by Larry Wheeler, who led the North Carolina Museum of Arts as director and CEO for nearly 25 years, retiring in 2018. Wheeler currently is a consultant to institutions seeking to strengthen their arts programming and to collectors as an art advisor. And if you're interested in getting any more copies, you will be getting some soon. And Liza has graciously agreed to come back and sign them. And thanks again for supporting your local independent bookstore. We will be wrapping up this event near 7, and I encourage you to continue any conversations you may have after the event at the beautiful root cellar patio, because we are closing. But thank you so much. Thanks.
So should we just do it up here?
You're going to do these
I was going to do the slides first.
Let me look at this one.
So Rose, you'll use that microphone then?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, a little bit of confusion when you press that. And I turn it back on again. Can you hear me now? No.
You have to press button.
Got it. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Marilla, for that lovely introduction. I'm just going to get this sorted out.
Or not.
I'm not. I'm going to just hold it. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming out tonight and being so supportive of this book, and thank you to Flyleaf for having me here tonight. I'm really excited to talk about the art of North Carolina. It's a subject that I've gotten really enthusiastic about over the last few years, and I'm especially honored to have the opportunity to talk about it tonight with my friend Larry Wheeler, who's here in the front row. I was thinking about this tonight on the way here. I don't know if any of you in the audience were fans of the old Vanity Fair and the Graydon Carter sort of heyday. But do you remember when he would talk about, people, he would say, like if there was some indie filmmaker who was trying to, make it big, they would talk about that person's big cool friend. And, so like maybe you were some little upstart filmmaker and you were lucky enough to have some sort of association with Martin Scorsese, for instance. He'd be your big cool friend. So Larry Wheeler has always been my big cool friend. And really my very good big cool friend. And I've always counted myself very lucky to be one of his very many little buddies. So I'm very grateful to Larry and honored to be with him here tonight. But before we have our conversation, I thought I would tell all of you a little bit about my book, how it came to be, and some of the things that I learned in the process of writing and reporting it. To begin, I would like to thank the generous sponsors who made this book possible. They're all listed here behind me, and I make a point of naming them because they made the book possible. They include the book's presenting sponsor, the Lewis H. Holding Fund of the North Carolina Community Foundation, as well as the Mary Duke Biddle Foundation. Is Kathy Harrison here?
Right.
Kathy, hi.
Hello.
I'm so glad you're here.
I'm very happy to be here.
I'm delighted. Well, thank you. Kathy is with the Mary Duke Biddle Foundation, which was very instrumental in making the book possible. You and several other sponsors who I'll name, including the Josephus Daniels Charitable Fund, the Thomas S. Keenan III Foundation, the North Carolina Community Foundation, First Citizens Bank, the A.J. Fletcher Foundation, and Jim and Anna Romano underwrote the photography of Lissa Gottwals, who's here in the second row, and made the book really come to life. It wouldn't have been a book without those pictures, so thank you for being here, Lissa. It really is an honor to speak about the art of North Carolina and to be surrounded by people who love it as much as I do. Larry is just the most obvious one in the room, but there are a lot of art lovers in this room. As you heard from Marilla, for many years I reported on art and culture for Walter, which is the magazine that I founded and edited in Raleigh and which continues to flourish today. In the course of looking for stories for Walter, I always stole all of the artist profiles for myself because I found them the most interesting. I had always loved art. I studied it in college, and I didn't want to assign them to anyone else. I wanted to meet those people. I wanted to go to their studios, and I wanted to learn their stories. And so in the process of writing all those stories about artists, it became obvious to me pretty quickly that we live in a region and it's in a state, not just a city, Raleigh was really my focus, but that is unusually rich with visual art. I had already known that that was true about North Carolina in so many other ways. I moved here 17 years ago, so I'm not a North Carolinian, and I was learning about it sort of from scratch. But I knew that North Carolina was very proud, and rightfully so, of our musicians, our chefs, of course, about writers. This bookstore can attest to that. But I had not known until I started writing all these art stories that it was true about our visual arts as well. Morella, do you mind starting the slideshow now, please? So you're going to see some pictures here on this television screen that hopefully illustrate what I'm going to talk about, which is that this state truly is a mecca for visual art. These photos are outtakes from some of Lisa's thousands of photographs taken for the book. Unfortunately, we didn't have room for most of them. We didn't have room for any of the ones you're seeing here. But together they illustrate the story that I'm trying to share, which is that the business of art making in this state is truly booming. Our artists are native North Carolinians and they are newcomers. They are urban and they are rural. They represent just about every age between 25 and 102. They are painters and sculptors and welders. They are weavers and blacksmiths and glassblowers. They make art out of tissue paper, wax and steel and canvas and paint. They make it out of strips of silk. They make it from cut-up wallpaper, discarded quilts, shredded documents, and of course, good old North Carolina clay. I've had the privilege of visiting their studios and seeing their art in progress and learning about how they live and work. And I started that journey a few years ago when I went to go look for this book. I was going to visit a friend in Denver, and she's involved in their art world, and I wanted to bring her the book that showed her that we had just as cool art scenes she did, that they did, and I was proud of it, and I wanted to show that to her. It didn't exist. We had lots of other kinds of books about North Carolina pottery, books about textiles, books about lots of different craft traditions, and books about a handful of individual artists, which were all great, but none of them connected the dots and told the sort of overall wider story that showcased and celebrated contemporary art as it's being made in North Carolina today, as well as the ecosystem that supports all of it. So I knew it was a great story and a real story, but once I realized that the story had not yet been told, I had to tell it myself. And so UNC Press agreed to publish it, and I then spent the last couple of years with Lisa, traveling the state, interviewing artists and curators, collectors, gallerists, museum directors, and what I found is that there is great news not just for people in this state who love art like I do, but for anyone who simply loves North Carolina. It's great news for all of us. It really is truer than I believed. North Carolina is filled with world-class visual artists, and this was something that I was very excited to discover. It's not a coincidence that they're here. They're actively coming here from lots of different places around the world to make art. And the ones who are already here are staying here to make it because this state fosters the making of art in countless ways. They come and they stay here because we have affordable space for the making of art. We have natural resources to create it with. We've got incredible natural beauty and biodiversity to inspire it. And we have an unusually robust system of grants and other opportunities to support it. These artists come and they stay because other artists are also here, and the creative communities that they have built together and are growing are vital to their creativity. And they come because we have excellent schools, programs, museums, and institutions that inspire and support art making, that collect art themselves and create art communities in the process. These places are also not here by accident. They're here thanks to a series of visionary decisions made by today's leaders and also, very importantly, by the leaders of the last century. These decisions were to create and fund museums and schools and even to underwrite individual artists themselves. Decisions that were groundbreaking on a national level. Decisions that in truth were often really impractical. They were always difficult and they were always expensive. But thanks to these 20th century visionaries, philanthropists, and civic leaders, the far-flung resources of what is largely a rural state and not a wealthy one became what is today an outsized and excellent ecosystem for the creation, the collection, and the celebration of visual art that is inarguably sophisticated and diverse by any measure. Probably the most pivotal moment came in 1947 As many of you know, when the North Carolina legislature created the nation's very first state-funded art museum in the North Carolina Museum of Art with an extraordinary $1 million appropriation for the purchase of art. That has never happened in any other state, that the legislature appropriated money for the purchase of art. And then several other events happened in rapid succession. The state's post-war business capital, which was Winston-Salem, established the nation's very first municipal arts council. Our state then became the very first in the country to honor their own arts and humanities with a statewide award. That's the North Carolina Award that was given out a few nights ago. And then our legislature chartered the very first public arts conservatory in the country when they founded the North Carolina School of the Arts. And then our Arts Council was founded to sustain and grow arts for the benefit of all North Carolinians. Today it has a sizable annual budget, $10 million annual budget, which is again funded by direct state appropriation. And today is one of the only statewide arts councils in the country to make grants to individual artists. It's a controversial thing to do. Most states, almost none do it. We also became the first state to create a cabinet-level agency dedicated to art, culture, and history, the very first one. So these decisions and many more laid a fertile ground. They enabled and inspired art to be created, to be nurtured and funded, to be seen and appreciated statewide. They paved the way for the establishment and the growth of so many of our art resources. Just look at the North Carolina Museum of Art today, after Larry Wheeler got to it. Transformed it tremendously, and it's a world-class institution. Look at the Ackland, the Nasher, the Gregg, the Weatherspoon, Ranolda House, all of our other university museums. Our institutions like Penland School of Craft, Charlotte's Lightbox, which is a photography organization, a world-class photography organization, Pocosin Art School, which needs more attention. There are so many more, and they're all flourishing thanks to those hard and early on decisions. The artists in this book are meant to be a representative sample, and just that, a representation, of the extraordinary artistic eruption of this century, an indication of the breadth and the depth of the thousands of remarkable artists at work in North Carolina today, truly the tip of the iceberg. All of these artists and their work are nothing if not diverse, as I hope you can see in these images. But it's also true that they have something important in common. They're all North Carolinians, and together they are telling the story of this place and the story of our times. So I hope you'll read more about their individual stories and the many fascinating people who populate our state making art in the book. Thank you for all of you for coming. And now I'd like to welcome Larry Wheeler up to this comfortable chair to talk to me up here. Thank you, Larry. I think we need to do that.
Is this on?
It's on.
Okay.
Thank you for being here. So when I wrote this book, I knew that I wanted it to be kicked off with a voice of authority. I'm not a curator. I'm not an art historian. I'm a journalist and a storyteller. And I approached this with all of the curiosity and the enthusiasm that I have, but I'm not an expert and don't pretend to be one. And I knew that I needed to have somebody to give me the voice of approval, and I didn't have to think very hard or even for a second about who that might be. So I called Larry, and he very graciously said yes, he would do it, and I'm really grateful that you did. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, but I'm not an art historian, and I'm not a curator either. I don't know what I'm a fundraiser. But I'm primarily enthusiastic for the creative spirit of North Carolina and all the artists and people who participate in it.
When you took a look at the artists that were in the book, were you surprised by any of it?
Well, when Liza came to me, when was that, 3 years ago? We have lunch like every month or two, and have for years. And at one of our luncheons, she says, I have this idea about doing a book on North Carolina artists. And I said, okay, explain it. And she says I would do a statewide discovery project. I would go to every part of the state. I would identify artists, talk to people who know artists. I said, well, that's a good start. And she says, then UNC Press has agreed to be a partner in this, and we would do a book. And the book. And, the idea was that it would be a coffee table book with beautiful photographs depicting the work of artists and the artists themselves. But it's so much more than that, as it turns out. First of all, I've got to proclaim my great admiration for Liza as a bookmaker, as a researcher. I don't know when she found the time, and particularly during the years of COVID, to travel from one end of the state to the other over and over again to meet artists I'd never heard about and places I'd never been or heard about. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, she uncovered some of the great creators of our state that I'd never even imagined were there. That's the discovery that she undertook is of extraordinary importance, a great contribution to the cultural history of North Carolina. And when she was talking about this book, I thought, well, you know what? There's never been a book about North Carolina artists, even in the past, that was very comprehensive. There was the Olamé Boucher book that I sort of inherited when I became the director of the museum in 1994. And I've been involved in the arts in North Carolina for almost 50 years. And so it was that if there had never been a book in 50 years about the artistic environment in North Carolina, it was high time that there was one. And, thinking that it would be a general overview survey of the art in North Carolina, never realizing the depth she would go to, not only in covering new artists, but in interpreting them through their own stories. And that's one of the most colorful aspects of the book, is the artists speak, not only through their work, but with their voices. And their voices are different from place to place, and that's all part of the charm of the book because of the diversity of voice, the diversity of ethnicity, the diversity of geography, the diversity of age. The artists, as Liza said, are everywhere, and it seems like the artist is everyone. As I say in my foreword, in North Carolina, it must be the air we breathe, because everyone feels that their own personal creativity is so important, and they're also quick to support the creativity of others.
Well, thank you for all of those very kind words. I have to say, one of the things that really surprised me, there were lots of things that really surprised me about interviewing such a diverse group of people, because there were things that kept coming up, similar stories and similar inspirations from people who were literally 102 or 25 and from all over the world, or Native North Carolinians. And one of the things that kept coming up was how important museums are. How important museums were to them as young people, exposing them to art, exposing them to the idea of artist as a calling, as a profession, as something that somebody could be, and that art was important to people and therefore worth pursuing. It planted seeds in people who've gone on to do remarkable things in art, and that exposure that they first received in a museum is profound. And I have to imagine that part of the reason we have so many remarkable artists here is because we have so many opportunities for them to be exposed to art at young ages. I mean, how do you feel about that from your North Carolina Museum of Art perspective?
Well, it's the role of the art museum is to inspire and engage people of all ages, particularly the young people. The other night, Herb Jackson was on a program that Liza hosted, and he said that he probably never would have been an artist if it had not been for the North Carolina Museum of Art and making trips to the North Carolina Museum of Art with his school classes. And he said he saw all of a sudden, his mind and spirit and actually his creativity was opened up. And he spent his life making art as a result of that. And there are so many accounts like this in the book, and that's why I applaud Liza too. In these stories, it reveals what the commonalities are. And in nearly every case, they find a source of inspiration And most often, it's the museum in their community, or the museum where they grew up, or an art gallery where they grew up. So this infrastructure of the arts, I mean, one thing feeds the other, and we wouldn't have great art museums without great artists in our midst. It's always been the case. We honor the greatest artists of the history of civilization in most museums. We also honor the artists who are the great artists who are making work today. I see John Bierman in the audience. You know, years ago we did an exhibition of John Bierman's work, and it was before I became director, so that was like more than 30 years ago. And he was just a young guy when I became the director. And he's still young, but he's not as young as he used to be. And he was this cute young artist, and everybody just loved John Bierman and everybody. And we bought this great painting by him that became a central picture in the American galleries at the Art Museum. So John Bierman could take his place next to Frederick Church or next to Thomas Moran, and he could play well with others, and he did. And that's true with so many artists. Damien Stammer, that the museum collected, and other artists that we've shown their work and ultimately added them to the collection. That's the role of the museum, to honor the artists among us in our community. And as you can see, there are so many artists in North Carolina. The shocking thing to me, as having been director for 25 years, there were artists I had never heard of. Therefore, they're not in the collection. They've never been shown at the museum. Are they worthy of being shown at the museum? Absolutely. Are they being shown at other museums? In certain cases, they're being shown. Thank God we have so many really good museums. So they're being shown at the Mint Museum or the McCall Center in Charlotte. They're being shown at Penland. They're being shown in Asheville. They're being shown in private galleries all over the state. They're being shown in Winston-Salem and Sika and the Weatherspoon. You go across at the Cameron in Wilmington. There's so many wonderful art museums and art centers that can advocate for their artists and offer them a higher level of legitimacy.
You know, another thing that I learned a lot about in reporting, doing the reporting and research about where art is shown and how, was the number of grassroots organizations and artist collectives that have sprung up to show art. Chieko Murasugi is here, and she is the founder of something called Basement here in Chapel Hill, which, would you mind telling a little bit about it, Chieko? Or you've got me putting you completely on the spot.
Sure. Well, it's called Basement because it's in the basement of a house in Chapel Hill. And there's a group of us, about 7 now, who are, all of us are somehow related to UNC Chapel Hill. Many of us are graduates of the MFA program, and one is a professor. But we show art that is not typically shown in commercial galleries. So we're looking for experimental work that deals with social issues or contemporary subjects that are, vital to the community and to ourselves as humans. And the work is, I guess, I don't know, cutting edge is kind of a cliche term, but many young artists who are taking risks and who are not necessarily established, and we draw from people from the Northeast, the Southeast, sorry. So we try to promote the work of really exciting work, artists who have some ties to the Southeast. So
well, it's a remarkable resource, and even during the pandemic, you managed to keep it going virtually. And I learned about artists and seeing who you were showcasing. And Chieko is an artist in the book as well. She does an extraordinary abstract art. And there are other organizations like Basement that are all over the place. There does seem to be something, you say, in the air or in the water, that there's this not only an urge to create and an urge to be innovative, but then to help people learn about it, to join forces and create something that will enable the public to appreciate it. I was talking to Maya Freeland, who's a Durham artist, 2 nights ago, and she was talking about how the system of grants that are in place in Durham enabled her to continue making art through the pandemic, and that she had spent time in Boston and she had spent time in other places, and that just she couldn't have continued making her art if she had not been living in Durham. In fact, I think she came back to Durham during the pandemic so that she could continue, and she's talking at length about another grant that she just got, which is going to fund projects for her to take into elementary schools all over the state. We have an unusual system of grants to support artists, an unusually robust and well-funded system of grants and supporting mechanisms. So that's a big piece of the story too.
Well, we also have a pretty sophisticated group of collectors now in the state of North Carolina. I'm excluding myself. Of course, I don't really consider myself part of that team. But Jefferson Holt has been an extraordinary collector of photography and all sorts of things over the years, and he's inspired a lot of us to pay attention and to collect the good work that we discover around us. And you know, wherever you go in North Carolina, people are proud of their artists, and if they're proud of their artists, they find a way to collect them. They find a way to have them in their lives and to own the work. And now, as a result of very serious intentionality in collecting, not only North Carolina, but artists from throughout the world, we have some of the great private art collections in the country, right here in North Carolina.
We really do. One thing that I have talked to some artists about is we do have some very important art collections, but a lot of artists would like to know a way to demystify art collecting for a broader audience. And I think, you know, galleries are in a funny place. They've been disintermediated a little bit by the internet, or a lot, and certainly gotten a big blow from the pandemic. What would you suggest for somebody who loves art, loves coming to the museum, but doesn't really know how they could begin to collect art? It can seem to a lot of people to be very intimidating or extraordinarily just sort of hurdles of expense and intimidation.
Well, you know, it's easy to say, well, just buy what you like. No, don't do that. Don't always buy just what you like. First of all, train yourself. That's what museums are for, and there are certain art galleries that are more sophisticated than other art galleries. Learn where they are. Pay attention to what museums are buying, museums are collecting, what museums are showing. Not just the NCMA, but the Ackland and museums all over, because there are curators involved, and there are scholars involved, and there are people who have been looking at art for many, many years, or either they just have strong instincts about what is the now in terms of art. You need to know a bit of that. You can't just go and pick a pretty picture off a gallery wall just because you can, and you do, and you will love it. But why not buy something that that is, you know, potentially more important than that somehow fits the whole, I wouldn't call it iconography, but fits the energy of where creativity is in the world today. There are certain themes artists work with, you know, at any one time. There's a zeitgeist. At any one time, there's a zeitgeist, that spirit of the time. So what defines that spirit of the times, and what is the voice of the artist in defining that spirit of the times? And those are the voices that you will find collected in Liza's work. And she was very critical in that way too. So she didn't include everybody. And you can't include everybody. But I'm getting emails from people saying, why wasn't I in the book? I said, I didn't do the damn book. Number one. And, you know, she had to have very strict criteria. You know, you had to be living in North Carolina, working in North Carolina, associated with North Carolina, and you know, fit the framework of what she was trying to achieve in terms of diversity of all sorts. And so, Liza, how do you? I know you hear from those people too. So, what do you say to them?
I do hear from some of them. Well, the criteria really was living and working in North Carolina, and that means that some people just got here, but that's okay. I think that that's one of North Carolina's greatest strengths is that we attract people. That people want to come here. They want to come here to study. They want to come here to try out a job. They want to come here because it's beautiful and they're enticed. That's a huge strength of ours as a state, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in. We're a magnet, and we should be proud of that fact. So I did talk to one curator along the way while I was interviewing everybody I could possibly get on the phone, and she said, "Well, what is your criteria?" And I told her what I just told you, and she said, "Well, some of those people who come to get a master's degree, they're just going to leave. Who cares? They're here now. They're North Carolinians. They've chosen North Carolina. We should claim them proudly." That was my criteria. That's my thinking. That if somebody has come here and has decided to live here and is making art here, they get to be a North Carolina artist. The people who didn't fit that bill are North Carolinians who were on a fellowship in Berlin or something. I'm sorry, I didn't know if they were coming back. That's not. I decided I couldn't take responsibility for that. But no, I do think that we have. Part of the reason there's so much diversity in this book is because we do have people who come here because we are a magnet for them. And will they stay here forever? I think we should be glad for what they contribute while they stay. But many of them do stay here forever. Yeah.
Well, you said at the beginning you were not a curator. You are now. This is a very thoughtful book. It is not thumbnail sketches of artists. There are thoughtful discussions of the work. It goes deep. So while it may not be a scholarly tome on the history of art in North Carolina, it becomes a very thoughtful presentation of the importance of art in North Carolina and why each of these artists and art forms is important and enduring. And it's very intelligent.
One of the things that you said early on in one of our conversations that got me looking deeper into the history of how art started getting made in North Carolina is you talked to me about how North Carolina really was not a wealthy state and very rural, and that it was bounded on either side by very wealthy states. And then when there started to be pockets of wealth in North Carolina through textiles and tobacco and furniture making, that the people who were fortunate enough to be traveling the world and making a fair amount of money wanted the culture that they saw at their places here. And they individually went out and brought it in. I'm talking about the Reynolds families and all the families who you can imagine, most of Winston-Salem at the beginning. But when you started talking to me about that history, I started digging deeper into all of that. And I found that some of that's still alive. That idea that don't assume that we're a rural state with nothing going on. We're just as sophisticated. We've got just as much going on, and we're going to invest in it and make sure it's the case. And I think that's still the case. I think that the North Carolina Museum of Art is the best example. But there are many others.
Well, it's the miracle and mystery of North Carolina. I don't know of another state in this country that has such a rich and vibrant public-private partnership. When you consider that the North Carolina Museum of Art was created with state funds in 1947 after the Second World War. A few years before that, the North Carolina Symphony was founded with state funds so they could travel all over the state and go to these small communities and expose these young children to classical music and to real musicians. The first North Carolina Arts Council was founded in North Carolina. The Mint Museum was founded before the North Carolina Museum of Art, in part with public funds. Nothing really happened in North Carolina unless there was public money and taxpayers' money, whether it was city money, county money, or state money. And that is remarkable, the level of state investment. That did not end. It continues. There is a remarkable level of state investment in the arts in North Carolina. When you consider when we built the new North Carolina Museum of Art buildings and we acquired the land for the park, that was all public money. that was not private money, and certainly there were private investors who joined in later. But the leadership's gifts was because the elected officials of North Carolina believed the arts were important for people's lives. They were important for community enrichment and growth. They were important for the reputation of the state at a time it was competing for major industries and economic growth. The arts have always been a partner in that as well. And so it's just a miracle that North Carolina, as conservative as people think it is, has always been one of the most enlightened states in embracing the true value of arts in society.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a point of pride. I mean, I think one of the things that first struck me when my husband and I, and 2 of our 3 children are here, when we moved here 17 years ago, was how proud everyone was to be North Carolinian. I was really kind of bewildered by it. Not because I didn't think that there was a reason for it. I just had never lived in a place where people were so proud of the place they lived. And I thought it was fascinating. And I don't think you can separate that pride, which is, as I was saying earlier, it's about so many things, food and writing, and don't forget our athletics and our incredible natural beauty. We're so proud, and rightfully proud, and we would never allow ourselves to not have the culture we deserve. And we that sort of built-in sense of confidence and pride in where we are translates to this kind of outpouring, I think. Another thing that I was really interested to discover and wrote about a fair amount in the book is the way that art has helped to revive communities that have fallen on hard times. And some of our smaller cities that were former tobacco towns or textile towns, they're peanut capital. I mean, there are just so many small, very beautiful towns that really had fallen on very hard times, and art is bringing them back to life. Wilson's a really good example. Kinston's a really good example. There are more. Rocky Mount's got some of that going on too. And it starts with the pride, it starts with the art, and then it builds from there. That's happening, this creative placemaking is happening all over the state.
The other night, I claimed that this was the Michelin Guide to the Arts in North Carolina, this new book. Because not only are you going to discover the best artists and the new artists and the artists that you want to collect, you're going to discover places you've never been before and you want to go to. I mean, there are these places she talks about that sound like the most exciting weekend visits that you can possibly imagine. And so I think it's going to excite people in so many ways about what North Carolina is and the new North Carolina, and a place of discovery. Not only discovery of place, but discovery of the artists who live there.
Thank you for reading it so thoughtfully and being so generous about it, Larry. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Larry or me? The photographer for the book, as I mentioned in my remarks, is here. Alyssa Gottwals is here. Can I ask you a question? Would you like to talk about what maybe one of your most favorite photo shoots was, or one of the most interesting things we discovered through your lens?
Sure.
Do you want to use this? Sure.
Thank you. Can I sit right there and turn this way? I guess we can't pull up the slideshow, but actually I could give a page in a book if I could figure out what it was. I think one of the, there were so many amazing artists and photo shoots and locations and experiences that it is hard to pick one. But there are several for sure that stood out in terms of the location or the effort that we went to get the photo. And one of them that stands out as being particularly fun and challenging physically, I would say, is Christina Lorena Weisner. Can you tell me what page it is? And then if you have a book, you could see what photo that I'm talking about. But she is a sculptor. I guess she would describe herself as a sculptor.
She's an environmental artist that uses sculpture as a tool.
There we go. And she created these amazing
237.
Thank you.
237. These sculptures from old beach chairs. Some of the parts are from, and then also the bigger sculpture that she's standing in the middle of. She found these huge negatives that were of rivers in North Carolina, and stretched them across these PVC pipes. I mean, it's
So, but Lisa,
brilliant.
it was March and it was 5 o'clock in the
Yes.
morning.
I'm getting to that part. Getting to that part. We met her really early in the morning in the Outer Banks, and knew that these sculptures were floating, but we didn't really have a sense of exactly how we were going to photograph it. But we photographed it in the water, which makes sense because that's where they're supposed to be. But it was cold, and it did mean wading out into the water. Luckily, we were in the bay, so or in the sound, I guess. So it was shallow, pretty far out. But it was cold, and
Did you have a wetsuit on?
I think I did bring a wetsuit
You
with
had-
me. I
you
think
had-
I knew that this might be a possibility, and there happened to be one in my closet, so I took it with me. But it was really great, and just watching her put all of it together, get it out there, and it was windy, so it wasn't, while it looks in the photo like it was still, it wasn't actually stationary. There was a lot of moving around and hauling them back together and moving them in different places. So, and I just really loved how it came out. Like, it felt like a very successful shoot where I at least felt like I got what I set out for. So that's one of my favorite ones.
So it was an adventure.
It was an
I
adventure.
think one of the things that Liza awakens us to in the book, through the voice of artists, is as she's talking to the artist, and over again, no matter what medium we think they work in, I say, well, I'm not just a potter. I'm not just a painter. I'm not just a sculptor. I work with all media. I work with, if I work with clay, I also work with wood. I work with color. I'm also a painter. So in being an artist in North Carolina, they embrace all the materials available to them and all the influences and all the media. So you can't just break them into neat categories anymore, because an artist is an artist, and they use all the means available to them to make their art.
I definitely found that over and over again. The idea that crafting is a verb, craft is a verb and not a noun, and that if they're really sort of pushing themselves, they're always learning a new technique, which would enable them to get into a new medium. It's a lot of the younger ones who really feel that way, but it's very kind of electrifying because they're doing so many different things.
I have a
Yes,
question.
yes,
So I
Robin.
still can't get over how proud I am of our state for how the history, I had no idea of the history of the support of the arts and how far back it goes, and I still feel baffled about that, but pleasantly baffled. I love that. But my question has to do with your interviewing of the artists. I'm sure that I'd love to know more about when you contacted them. Were they excited to hear from you? And did you have any question in particular that you felt like when you asked each artist, they really opened up when you began that sort of line of question, talking about themselves? They're usually creating.
Mm-hmm.
You're asking them to talk about their creation and what they're doing.
Well, the first part of your question, I called almost everybody cold. I knew a couple of people. I knew John Bierman already, but I didn't know very many people already because I was casting such a wide net and such a wide geographic net, and my reporting on artists had been so focused on the Triangle until then. So I really was calling people cold, and they didn't know what Walter Magazine was, and I had a couple of people say to me, well, I don't really want to be in a book about North Carolina art. I'm an artist. Don't pigeonhole me. Don't regionalize me. Don't patronize me. I'm an important artist. I happen to live in North Carolina. Fine. I said, that's fine. That makes lots of sense, but can I come and talk to you? So I got to talk to, everybody that I asked to be in the book eventually agreed. I did have a couple of people who were a little trickier than others. It was hard for me to get to, for instance, Mel Chin, who is a recluse, really lives a hermetic life, very, very far away from anything. And he's almost impossible to reach. But I did eventually get to him, and he agreed, which was just, it felt like such a great breakthrough. And he lives in this mythical place. He lives in this vine-covered old stone mansion that, I mean, you can't make it up. It's near Tennessee, and it's just in the middle of nowhere. And it feels like a magical realm, and it's like out of a fairy tale. He's got the mansion, and it's got 700 studios in it, and he lives in this little house over here, and he's building another studio over there, and all these graduate students are all around, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And he's making huge conceptual art that's in Times Square. It's just really remarkable stuff. So, but your question about what kind of cracked people open, or is that what? I have no idea.
Just curious about when having a conversation with your, the people also who are resistant. Just what opens them up.
I think that no, there was not one sort of open sesame line, but I think there was just people gave us a lot of time, and we needed it. I mean, I felt as if everybody in this book. I made sure that I found a donor to send a book to every artist in the book because they gave so much. They gave us. We would say, okay, we'll be there for a couple hours, and we'd stay all day because the light changed and we needed for the picture. We needed to set something else up, or I don't know, the conversation was meandering, or they got really excited to talk, because this is the part that kind of broke my heart a little bit, but also got me really excited. Nobody to ask them anything in so long. So there's pent up with all of these stories to tell. And so it would just go on and on and on, and I would just, I was so eager to listen. I think just listening, that I don't think there was any real magic to it, just really being interested in listening.
Well, Liza, thank you for taking the time, an enormous amount of time she invested in this project. And of course, she learned a lot too. She made new friends and made new friends for us all. But it was, thank you for doing the work.
Oh, thank you, Larry. Thank you for your support. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for caring about this. I do feel like that this is kind of a mission. I want everyone to know. Is there another question? Oh, Chico, I'm sorry.
I was just going to comment that Liza is just a fabulous interviewer. I mean, I don't know, she just was so relaxed, asked a few questions, and I ended up just blabbing away. And it was extraordinary.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
I just was curious because I understand that, there's some artists that are very introvert, but do you think the pandemic and the lack of human connection, when they finally said yes to you, contributed to opening the door? Because we all realized, we can't be islands. At least that's the lesson I got.
That's a good thought. It might be true. It also though put up some walls because we had to keep physical distance from
COVID.
We had a lot of frightened people we were trying to talk to and photograph, and a lot of these photographs are outdoors because that's the only place anyone would meet us.
Right.
And in many instances, the artists would have masks on. We would all have masks on the entire time. So I didn't even see their face until Alyssa said, okay, we're going to take the picture. They take it off. She take the picture. They put it back on.
Okay.
So in some ways, it was, I think that was hard to get past.
Okay.
The masks are really hard to get past. But again, I think time, just spending the time. I would follow up on the phone too. So, if I needed to. But it was a great adventure. I'm very lucky to have gotten to take it. Thank you all for everything. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your support.
Thank you, Larry.
And thank you, Morella. She's still here. I know she said we needed to leave so she could close her bookstore.